Welcome, guys, to my discussion of the HBO miniseries Watchmen. Today, I'll be talking about episode 3 entitled She Was Killed by Space Junk. I will not be talking about this great episode alone. I'll be joined by Matt Crandall. So, welcome, Matt.
Thanks for having me. Excited to chat some more Watchmen.
This episode starts out in quite an unusual way. So we have a woman entering into a blue phone booth, and we are led to believe that these phone booths are direct communication devices with Doctor Manhattan. And it's really interesting because when the woman enters the phone booth, we discover a couple things. We discover that these phone booths are put there by the True Corporation. So I'm like, the True Corporation, what the hell is that about? Because it's the first time we've heard this company's name. So that was very, very interesting. The fact that this corporation made a deal with Dr. Manhattan so people on Earth could talk to him really didn't track with me, because Dr. Manhattan, both in the novel and Zack Snyder's film, was very, very, he accepted humanity, but he never really got along well with humanity. If that's if that's okay to say. So it was very odd to me that he would allow something like that to happen. This woman ends up telling a joke about a little girl who ends up playing with a brick. Matt, what do you think about the opening sequence?
So I thought it was weird. Blue phone booth, and Jean Smart, the great Jean Smart, is on the phone there. And when she is on the phone and leaving this, what we find out is a message, we also find out, yeah, it's for Dr. Manhattan, and you can record a message for him. And it sounds like it's some sort of subscription service because it says thanks for being like a subscriber to these things. But it's not a two-way communication. It's like you can leave a message and we'll beam it to Mars in 40 seconds. And if the guy hears it, great. And if he doesn't, you will never know. So I thought it was a weird device that they are using to try and show us a lot of people are obsessed with Dr. Manhattan. And we find out as this goes on, Laurie has a very good reason to be, because she is Silk Spectre, who is a person that we have known before, and we get a lot more information as this episode goes on about her character, but her time with Dr. Manhattan is something that she cannot move past. It's something that she is still holding on to. And so recording these jokes, which is all because her father was the comedian who is a well-known character from Watchmen. So she's recording these jokes and sending them to a former lover on Mars. And it's like, it's a little strange because we never know if he gets these messages or not. And we haven't seen Dr. Manhattan on this show so far, so we don't even know that he would get these. But we do remember that time and space works completely different for a being like Dr. Manhattan than it does everyone else. And I think it's interesting that as this episode goes and we see her go to this phone booth multiple times, and we're wondering, is this just like screaming into the void? By the end of the episode, we kind of get an answer. And you kind of get a sense of whether this is actually something that is meaningful, or if this is just for people to feel less small by thinking they're communicating with a higher power, even though it's not a two-way conversation.
Can I just ask you this? At this point in the series, do you think that Dr. Manhattan is actually on Mars?
At this point, I have no reason to believe that he's not. The other thing I would say that was striking about the opening is that I was surprised that we're like basically meeting a new character in this first 5 minutes. And then as this episode goes on, this entire episode is framed from this character's point of view. Angela takes a complete back seat in this entire thing, which is something the comic would do. But so far in the show, the episodes have been very central to Angela Abar and what's going on around her. So even though Angela is in this episode and does pop up eventually, I was a little bit surprised that they tried this at episode 3 to kind of give us a different point of view for the majority of this entire episode.
I honestly had no idea who this woman was until a couple scenes later. The next scene that happens is we see Laurie going into a bank to possibly open an account, and it turns out that Laurie is a part of a gang that's trying to rob the bank. And then within a couple minutes, this superhero wearing body armor, looking like the Night Owl, looking like Batman, shows up. And Laurie says something very, very interesting to this guy that says he just basically says, surrender, the game is up, the jig is up, that the technical superhero babble. Laurie says something so interesting. She says, so who do you think tipped you off that this bank, this branch of this bank was getting robbed exactly right now and exactly at this time? Who do you think tipped you off in the first place that this was happening? And then all of a sudden, the other robbers that are with Laurie reveal an FBI badge, and we discover that Laurie works for a anti-vigilante task force in the FBI. And I'm like, that is really interesting, because both in Zack Snyder's movie and in the comic, Laurie was a member of the Watchmen. Now to see that Laurie had a change of heart and is completely in the other camp, that is tremendously interesting to me.
Yeah, and it's played in such a way that it's a fun dynamic scene where at first we're questioning what is happening. Is this Laurie character robbing a bank or not? And as you pointed out, not Night Owl. This is Batman. This is 100% Batman. This is Batman. not even pretending it. Not even pretending it's not Batman, right? Like the suit. They made the cowl have a little less pointy ears, but it's a Batman suit. So everything he's wearing is Batman. And then they do the surprise reveal where it's the FBI's anti-vigilante task force, and they're trying to take this guy down. And Laurie shoots him, and they're like, "Oh, how did you know that his body armor was going to stop the bullet?" And we can tell she didn't know. She didn't fucking care. She was willing to kill this guy if that's what it came to. And so it is interesting knowing the few things that we kind of get from her. Silk Spectre was a person who was on the Watchmen, but she was a Nepo baby superhero because her mother was also a superhero and forced her into it. So it wasn't ever anything that she actually chose. And then she had found out that her father was the comedian who was a vigilante, who was a psychotic, crazy guy. And then she had these relationships, Dr. Manhattan, Night Owl. And she was kind of part of that. And now we find out who watches the Watchmen. Well, she's on the team who watches the Watchmen. So she has flip sides. So that's an interesting dynamic and makes us wonder what happened that she would now be working for the man rather than siding with, her fellow superheroes, but knowing that that was never a life that she chose because, like I said, her mother was a superhero, so it was expected that she was going to be and pushed her into it, is an interesting dynamic that we haven't really seen explored in this kind of venue before. So I thought that was one of the cool things, and that scene with the guy stopping the robbery, and then him being the guy who gets arrested for trying to help was a nice spin.
The next thing that happens is basically Laurie goes home, and when Laurie gets in her house, the Watchmen series has done this amazing thing so far. So for every episode, they reveal their episode titles in this really cool fringe 3D kind of way. What do you think about that editorial choice? Because I really, really like it, because Fringe did the same thing with the 3D titles and all that stuff.
Yeah, Fringe did it. Panic Room was one of the opening credit scenes that really used 3D titles in a cityscape and people walking by and stuff. I liked it. It feels like a comic book thing, because sometimes they will put the title in a weird frame in the comic or the graphic novel, so it's staying true to like Watchmen's origins.
Laurie gets home. She I believe she has like a bag, and inside the bag she has a little mouse, and we find out that she has a cage, and in the cage is an owl. right? She goes to the bedroom. She's preparing to basically lay down for the night and relax. When she gets a knock at the door, and the guy that knocks at the door happens to be Senator Keene. Senator Keene is the senator that passed a law that gave cops the permission to start masking up to protect their identities. And basically, what Senator Keene is there to do is Senator Keene basically is there to ask Laurie to go down to Tulsa, Oklahoma to investigate the death of Jed Crawford. What do you think about finally learning some more stuff about Senator Keene?
Yeah, so Keen showing up, and as you said, we saw that she's got this owl in a cage. And they have like a who's on first moment where what's the owl's name? Who? The owl. Who? The owl. Who? Is interesting. And basically, Senator Keene, as you said, is the one after the White Knight who enacted these things that cops can mask up. And he's going to be trying to run against Redford for president. So he's trying to politically get in the good graces of the public. And he thinks that if he can solve the murder of this police chief, it will be a good way to do that, to gain sympathy and to show that he's strong on crime and all that kind of stuff. And so he says to her, we're going to need you to go to Tulsa to investigate this. So finally, we're like, oh, okay, that's how these two things are going to interweave. Because for the first 15 minutes, I'm like, where is our crew? So what are we doing?
It was a very leftovers kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely a good point. And it's interesting. I sometimes feel like when they do that, if I'm not super invested into the story we're following and I was super invested in the one that we're diverting from, I can get frustrated. So I was glad that these two were going to finally dovetail. And I just want to make a note that, like, you know, the scene with Keen is interesting because I do love the way Jean Smart is playing this, where she's like playing it very exasperated with everyone. Like everything, it's just like, ugh, I hate this bullshit. Like, would everybody just leave me alone and stop being so annoying? And James Wolk is fine too. Usually, this dude is luckily Watchmen's only a miniseries, because James Wolk is always a harbinger of death on a TV show because 99% of the shows he's been on get canceled. So, like, this is the only time I would ever say you go Wolk, you go broke, but it's because of James Wolk always leads to a show getting canceled. So thank God this was a one and done. But I just love that Jean Smart is so friggin' good that I start to get invested around this point where it's like, oh, she's going to go there. And I start to care because, you know, she's great. And she's been on a super run. You know, she kind of disappeared for a while. And then she was on Fargo, Legion, Watchmen, HBO's Hacks. She was just in Babylon. Like, she's incredible. And it's great that people are recognizing that now.
I just want to hear your thoughts on just one little exchange that happens between Senator Keene and Laurie when he's actually mentioning that he possibly wants to run for president against Redford. He mentions that since the enactment of his policy, crime in Tulsa is down 80%, and he does mention that this program was a pilot program first tried in Tulsa, but other areas around the world want to try and adapt this. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's letting us know that this is not the norm everywhere. Mm-hmm. And it also raises a little bit of the stakes because we know what Angela found in Judd's closet. And how is this pilot program going to go over if part of the headline is, you know, Captain who enacted this thing killed, which one is bad. 2, possibly killed by the 7th Cavalry. That would be a great headline. But then 3, was a member of the 7th Cavalry. That'll shoot this down and it will not take off. That will actually prove that letting them have anonymity and wear these masks allows them to do a bunch of shady shit in the background. And it will be a real stumbling point in his campaign if it can be turned against him rather than a pro.
But I'm very surprised that Angela, as of yet, has not told anyone that a person that she trusted and she loved is a fiery racist. I'm very surprised why she is keeping that close to her chest at this point, because because in our last episode you mentioned that Angela might not trust everyone in the police force, but I would think there comes a time when even if you don't trust everybody, you have to let somebody know.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's mostly denial. That's not the guy that she knew. She didn't know that he was had this double life, so she's trying to hope that it's not he had this here as some sort of shrine and this was his outfit. Maybe there's another reason he had it that's not the horrible thing.
Right, right, right. Anyway, the next thing that happens is Laurie goes to a standard FBI briefing, and in the standard FBI briefing, we find out how the Seventh Cavalry came to be. We see some gruesome images about the White Knight, and also there happens to be like this nerdy FBI agent guy running the projector, and during the slideshow he puts a picture of a basically a Warshak manifesto, and the head FBI agent who is running the briefing says, "What is this?" And the guy says, "Well, this is a basic manifesto that Warshak wrote, and I think it's important because the Seventh Cavalry basically adopted his face, right?" And the lead FBI agent guy says, who's running the briefing, he says, "Who gives a shit about Warshak?" That's very interesting because I believe that if Warshak was still around, he would be really, really disgusted by the fact that his face has been adopted by a bunch of racist rednecks. He would be really upset.
He wouldn't be thrilled. I don't think anybody would be thrilled. But in Watchmen, Rorschach is constantly writing in Rorschach's journal, and that's what this is.
Right.
So
right,
this
right.
is pages from that the Seventh Cavalry have used to lay their groundwork. And of course, as anything can be, it's misinterpreted and used for hate when Rorschach was unhinged and was a criminal, but this is not the kind of thing that we assume he would be into. And what that scene shows us is that, even though we are now at this point rooting for Laurie to do whatever she's going to do, the rest of the FBI is kind of a bunch of bureaucrats, sycophants, and dipshits because they're not even looking at this clear evidence right in their face. They're willing to just blow over it, and they're just concerned about, putting a bow on this and getting the win rather than actually digging deep into the important stuff, that the ramifications of everything they know. So I thought it was interesting where they're like, yeah, here's your briefing and now you got to go and we'll send a bunch of people with you. And she's like, no fucking way. Like, I don't want any of you assholes tagging along, but if I got to bring someone, then give me the nerd. And so I thought that was interesting because it's showing us that, like, the FBI, this division, is not that great. History has shown us it's all cyclical. It's all patterns. You should be investigating the past to understand your present.
There's this really, really nice scene with Laurie and Petey, the nerd, the FBI nerd that she took with her to Tulsa. There's this really nice scene between them on a plane. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, she basically says, "I know you're like a superhero fanboy," and they have this talk, and he says, "Yeah, look, just because I know who you are and all this stuff, I'm not some sort of idiot fanboy. I'm actually like legit. But yes, I know all the history because that stuff is interesting to me." So we find out he's not the same as every other guy in that room.
During that conversation, he shows Laurie a mask that he made, and I'm like, look. I understand that you just stuck up for yourself, but just by you having that shows that you do have something of a superhero complex. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, a little bit for sure, and it's a very Night Owl-esque kind of mask that you're just like, okay, guy, relax. And when in Rome, and she's like, we're not in Rome, it's fucking Tulsa, you moron. So I thought that was interesting because it does show that he's claiming he's not, some sort of crazy fanboy, but obviously he does have some sort of longing for those days and to be part of that group. And maybe that's why he got into the FBI in the first place. We do have a lot of more questions than we do answers about Agent Petey.
So the next scene that we see is a very, very, very short scene. So basically, we have Red Scare and Pirate Jenny taking a Capitol member out of a truck, and Lori shows up, and she says the most funniest thing ever. She says, "Sir, are your civil liberties being violated?" Right? Because she identifies herself as a member of the FBI to Red Scare and Pirate Jenny, and then she says that line. And then the guy is obviously he's got a thing over his face, and he says, "Yes, man, my civil liberties are being violated." And she goes, "I don't care. I don't give a damn." So I really like that Laurie's sense of humor is really in line with the comedian's sense of humor from the film for me, and it must have been from the comic for you, yes?
Yeah. And that that is a great scene, so much so it was in every ad and trailer for Watchmen that HBO ran, where, "Sir, are your civil liberties being violated?" "Yeah, they are." I was kidding. I do not care. Like, and just the delivery is perfect. And that is a very sort of comedian-esque moment, which is interesting, knowing her lineage. And now we're back in Tulsa and we're seeing, she's like, "I need to talk to whoever's in charge. Where's this Looking Glass dude?" And so I thought that was interesting that finally we're catching up with our main plot. And then her and Looking Glass have a sit down in the capsule. And I thought it was cool because we find out that she knows a lot. She's like, "Hey man, take the mask off." And he's like, and she's like, "This is your name. This is your thing. Like, I know who you are. Just don't be an asshole. I'm going to pick seeds out of my teeth if you don't lift this mask." And so he does. And then she asks him about the capsule and he says, "Yeah." She says, "Oh, it's a racist detector." And he goes, "It's not that simple." And she's like, "It's a fucking racist detector." So I just like that they boil it down and they have a good, interesting scene where we start to understand that she's stepping into this kind of as like king shit and just like, "I'm not going to put up with any of this bullshit protocol where you guys are afraid of revealing who you are. I know more than you. I know everything, so just come clean, because if you don't now, I'm going to find out anyway." So I thought that was interesting because she really steps in from a position of power and just takes over.
I really, really like that scene for a lot of for a lot of the reasons that you just mentioned. Because I like the fact that she's a hetero buddy, but I like the fact that she is quirky and funny, and she's got this dry wit. Like I mentioned before, she really has the DNA of her father, the comedian, and I thought that was very, very interesting. Instead of outwardly hating him, she is sort of paying homage to him and sort of embracing him by sort of adopting his sense of humor. I thought, which was something very, very interesting to me, at least.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I think it's partly, this is going to sound like a sweeping stereotype generalization. The older you get, the less you give a shit, right? So, like, I think she's like past the point of pretending that she's not these things because she's seen so much and so much has gone on, and so many of her friends, like the other Night Owl, are in jail and things have gone wrong, and Dr. Manhattan's on a planet and hasn't communicated with anyone in years. It's just like, I only have so many fucks to give and I'm all out of fucks. And that's like her ethos, right? So I think that that's kind of where she's operating from 90% of the time we see her in this episode.
As these scenes with Laurie are happening, we keep cutting back to Laurie in the Dr. Manhattan Blue Pod, and she keeps telling this story about these three people, going up to heaven and being judged by God. And I was like, wait, when she started telling these stories, I was like, wait a minute. These people in the story that are being judged by God are the original Watchmen. So what did you think about that stuff?
Yeah, that's another, we're telling you one thing but it means something else. So the subtext of that joke, that it's a very long joke that she keeps trying to tell, and she fucks it up once and then starts again, and is about, yeah, like the comedian Night Owl, all these people, and being judged by God. We know that she's saying this to Dr. Manhattan, but he is kind of God in this universe, right? So it's interesting. It's bringing back a lot of what we know of the history of Watchmen, putting it in this familiar sort of context of a long, lengthy joke, but there's so much subtext to it that it's interesting. And certainly, anytime we cut to that blue phone booth, I'm like, okay, I hope sometime we're gonna pay off why we keep seeing this. And the final scene of the episode finally does pay it off. But I'm just like, yeah, this is like a weird, quirky, like phone booth out of the '60s with the weird spinning thing on the top. That I think we had to be really generous to sit through those scenes, which is why they loaded it with the Watchmen subtext to the story she's telling.
You weren't a fan of the stories that Laurie was telling throughout this episode, right? Because you didn't see how the writers were going to bring it back around.
I was just hoping that they would, because
Okay.
we spent so much time. It's like 12 minutes of the episode. It feels like we are watching her send these transmissions to no one, right? So again, it's partly just I was so invested in the what Angela is doing, and Angela is so sidelined that the fact that we keep spending so much time with Gene Smart in a phone booth, I'm
Hmm.
just hoping they can land that plane, because I'll say it. This is my least favorite episode of the three we've talked about so far.
Okay. Okay.
I
Okay.
think it's fine, but the other two are so dynamic and engaging, and this one holds you at a distance, I feel like. So
Okay.
I was interested, but also with some of the other scenes we get as we go with Vite and stuff, I'm starting to feel like, fuck man, how is this all going to come together? Because it feels like we're going from point A to point B, but we're taking like this super long way around.
Oh, also with the Adrian Veidt stuff doesn't seem to fit in the puzzle that the writers are cooking up for us. The Adrian Veidt stuff seems like pieces from another puzzle that we may never get the answers to. Speaking of the Adrian Veidt stuff, do you want to just talk about the Adrian Veidt stuff, because that stuff was very fucking confusing to me.
So yeah, we're seeing Vite off in his castle doing his, weird cosplay sort of thing, and he's got his people working, and we see some newspapers. And as this is going, this stuff feels so disconnected from everything that we're starting to wonder, what is this leading to? But also, through a few things that we see, we're starting to wonder, where the fuck is this? Because there's a lot of weird shit going on where this guy is. The clones, a dude freezing to death. I'm like, what is happening here? Where is this castle? And knowing Watchmen, you start to wonder, is this some sort of otherworldly thing? How is this going to come back? How are we tying this into hopefully our main through line, or is this part of the like Black Freighter weirdness that's never actually going to intercept with the main story?
You mentioned the Black Freighter because in one scene during the Adrian Veidt stuff, Adrian Veidt goes off to go hunt boar or something, right? And as Adrian Veidt rides past camera, there is a flag
There is, yeah.
that has the skull and crossbones, just like the Black Freighter stuff. I'm like, oh, I saw what you did there, guys. Applause, applause, applause. The other thing about the Adrian Veidt stuff. So when Adrian Veidt tries to kill like a buffalo, right? So he kills the buffalo, and he gets off his horse, and he's about to go collect it, right? And all of a sudden, somebody starts shooting at his feet, and I'm like, who the hell is this guy? And then later on, we discover that this guy is called the Game Warden, and that the Game Warden is basically Adrian Veidt's adversary or something. So, just what did you think about all that? Because I found that very, very strange.
Right. We start to wonder, knowing that Vite had all these crimes that he did. Okay, he's been exiled for his crimes, and maybe this guy is like to make sure that he doesn't cross a line while he's in exile. So it's interesting, and I think that that flag was sort of telling us this might feel like the Black Freighter, a side story that you really have to work hard to see how it connects to the main story. But it was kind of like Damon planting a flag saying like, be patient and let us work towards the shit. And I think it's partly because this is the third episode and we still are unsure what the hell any of this means. This is a series that I think gets a lot of rope because of the Watchmen name, but there is so much that's kind of confusing and odd that you just hope they don't hang themselves with the rope by the end. Are they going to find a way out of this? And obviously, we have the hindsight now, knowing that they do find the way to make it all feel cohesive and like part of a story. But even when I was watching this live, I remember feeling like I really have to extend them a lot of goodwill because it's a lot of it is very confusing at this stage of the game. The way that it's structured, the way that we're seeing this stuff, and especially just everything in the Vite storyline is so weird, right?
Mhm.
It's super weird that I can see why, like, there are a lot of people who tried to watch this show, and I think this is the episode that they quit after because they're just like, I just can't see the puzzle. But it is the kind of thing where if you are willing to go on the weird, I'm just gonna let this wash over me, and hopefully at the end I will figure it all out, then it is worth it.
Do you think that that this Watchmen HBO miniseries is catered for those individuals who are fans of Damon's work, and is catered for those individuals who love Lost? Even when I was watching this when it was released on HBO, I gave Damon a whole lot of rope to hang himself with because I love Lost. So I knew that he was gonna work this Adrian Veidt stuff back into the main plot, but I was very, very concerned about how he was going to do that.
Right. Well, I don't think that it was designed with that in mind. I think the ethos always was fans of the Watchmen graphic novel, fans of Watchmen. Because I also feel like a lot of this is very inaccessible if you have never picked up Watchmen or seen even the
Really?
movie. I I think you
Okay.
really you have to really go out on a limb to think that this stands alone if you have never seen any of the Watchmen universe, because I just find that a lot of people would probably not put up with the weirdness. Now that might be me underestimating the audience, but also remember at this point in time, unfortunately, there are a lot of people who aren't fans of Damon Lindelof because of the ending of Lost. And from I know somebody who like they were like Lost almost killed me, hated the ending, and then they saw Prometheus and they were like, fuck this guy forever. I will not watch anything he ever does. Okay? Which is the opposite of me because I love Lost and I love Prometheus.
Yes.
But I know there are people like that who exist who they hear Damon Lindelof, they go hack and they don't watch it. So I don't know. I think HBO is always just thinking we're going to let the creators do what they want and hopefully it will land. And they had all the faith in the world in this guy to just let him do this show that's super weird and hoping that by the end of it, it will have been successful. And as we know, it ends up getting to a place where it is quite successful and very well regarded. But I think that it's one of those shows that really plays better once you can just sit down and watch all of it. Because I
Mhm.
remember week to week feeling like a little frustrated. And even the conversation was all like, how much weirder can this show get without starting to gel? Like it was like a lot of stuff that's just, we're taking the jello out of the fridge a little too early. It's not solidified yet. Um, but again, that's just what I would see back when this aired and, reading some online stuff.
We move on to the basic crescendo of this episode. In my view, we move on to Judge Crawford's funeral. How do you feel about when Laurie introduced herself to Angela, because she played it off as she didn't know who Angela actually was. So that conversation was very, very off putting and very, very weird to me. So, what did you think about that?
Well, and she kind of plays it like that, but also when Angela's like, "Oh, I've been retired 3 years. I'm not that," and Gene Smart says some shit like, "Oh, sure, yeah, I hate these cops who. What's the difference between a masked vigilante cop and like a masked vigilante? You know, if you ever find out, let me know. Like, there's not a difference." And she, in that conversation where Angela's like, "Oh, I'm just retired. I just do this." Gene Smart is really playing it like, "Oh, okay. But we know it's, yeah, sure, idiot. I fucking know who you are. I already have mentioned to other people that I know that you're Sister Knight and all this shit." So it's what they're saying doesn't line up with what we know is actually being said, because even by the end of this whole scene, it's pretty clear, Gene Smart is in control of a lot more stuff than people think. And we also start to wonder, though, about the different masks that people are wearing metaphorically in this universe, because we know Judd was not presenting as a member of the 7th Cavalry. And then with the stuff that goes down with Keen, that doesn't feel legitimate by the end. I start to think this was all orchestrated as some sort of photo op for this guy to get in the paper as, look what happened. So I start to question everything is too coincidental to be a coincidence.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Senator Keene, the first time I watched the series, I was like, "There's something off about this guy," and not just the fact that he wants to run up against Redford, but there's something not quite right. In hindsight, I think I was right to suspect that he was a little bit shady. I just want to mention one more little point about Laurie's interaction with Angela and her family. I love when Laurie introduces herself to Cal, because he's there again. He's Cal is just basically the doting husband, and I'm like, what is it with this guy? He's like always there, but I'm like, why would Damon cast such an amazing actor to play basically like a housewife kind of guy throughout this whole series? Because I'm like, why would he do something like that?
I think we start to get this sense that, Cal is kind of like the Mr. Mum who's trying to hold it all together, but he's doing it like calm under pressure guy who we don't really see any flares of personality. He's just kind of there. And
Right,
he's
right,
and
right.
he's sort of like background dressing almost when he's around.
Mm.
And you start to think, what we know of Angela is she's very dynamic and charismatic, and this guy she's with seems very flat. But I don't think this is raising any red flags at this point for me. I'm just like, oh, this guy just, they haven't given him any of the scenes yet where we're gonna see like what is actually between them and why they are together. But knowing what we're actually heading towards, then it does seem very intentional that he's kind of
Flat.
like fading into the background all the time because he's not trying to stand out.
We finally start the funeral for Jed, in which Angela does a eulogy, and I really like what Angela says before she gives the eulogy. She says that she made a deal with Jed that if anything ever happened to the two of them, they would deliver each other's eulogies at each other's funerals if something happened to them. And she starts singing this Texas folk song, and as she sings it, the camera pans over to Lori and she starts clapping. But as that is happening, we hear we hear this like all of a sudden we start to hear this ticking clock happen within the scene. And then we discover that a member from the 7th Cavalry is digging their way underneath the cemetery to pop up, do a suicide bomber kind of thing, to try and kill Senator Keene, who is attending the funeral. So, what do you think about that sequence?
So I thought it was really interesting. And one small tidbit that's worth noting
Hmm.
is that earlier in the episode, they mention Judd's cause of death. And they say, "Did you
Oh,
do a talk screen on the body?" And they say, "Why would he? Would we? He was hung." And Laurie says, "Well, maybe we should look into this because she lets us know that she knows that, you know, it's suspect and that the person who killed him is not who they seem to be. So we know that they maybe are going to do more with the body of Judd after this because they haven't at this point." And so the 7th Cavalry guy shows up, grabs Keen in a very convenient way. And now what they don't know is that Laurie's got a gun and she's a shoot first, ask questions later.
yeah.
So she's like, "Fuck this. I'm tired of this
Yeah.
shit." Shoots the guy, right? She's like, "It's over." So this doesn't become some sort of long drawn out standoff. It's over. And then Angela springs into action and they throw the bomb into the casket so that nobody is going to die today other than the 7th Cavalry member, which ends up, obviously we can't run any tests on Judd's body anymore because it's fucking dust. It's gone. So we're not going to be able to do the talk screen, which is a thing leading out of this that I think is kind of key, maybe. Right.
Right.
But I think it was interesting that, we have this build up where the 7th Cavalry show up and we're like, "Oh no." And then Gene Smart just quickly like, "Oh God, bang. Like, let's get this over with." So I liked seeing her demeanor. But again, as this plays out, I start to have questions about Keen because I'm like, how is this supposed to go? Is this now it's like a photo op kind of thing? Like, can you believe the 7th Cavalry came after me and like we stopped them? And I'm like, this is shady. This shit doesn't sit well with me.
It seems to be very, very orchestrated. The whole thing seems to be very, very for the cameras, and it doesn't seem to be genuine at all. A little while later, we discover that Angela has taken it upon herself to basically look at to basically investigate the way that the 7th Cavalry member dug his way into Judd's funeral. And Laurie and Angela have a very, very frank conversation in a crypt. What did you think about that stuff? Because that scene, I think, to me, was the finest scene in the episode.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's the no it's kind of like the laying the cards on the table and trying to get to this thing and just having finally like Laurie and Angela have their scene where we've got these two powerhouses, you know, Regina and Jean going toe to toe. It's the kind of thing that you wait the whole episode for because we've built up how no nonsense and strong this Laurie character is. And we already know that Angela, has all this pent up rage that she can uncork at any moment if needed. So I thought that was a very key scene and certainly the acting sort of showcase of the episode.
We are back at the Dr. Manhattan phone booth, and Laurie wraps up her final story. In her final story, she says, "It's been a long day in heaven, but God has one more individual to see." And that one more individual that he sees is the little girl that threw the brick in the air from her first joke. The brick that the little girl threw in the first joke, well, in this new joke, as she's being judged by God, the brick that she threw up in the air ends up smashing God in the face and killing him, basically. Well, before she steps out of the phone booth, she just basically says, "Listen, I know you're not probably there actually getting these messages or listening to me, but it's really nice to talk to you every now and then, right? It's nice to unburden myself."
Dr. Manhattan being this all powerful being, even if you have moved on, you can't move on, as we see with the gigantic blue dildo. Like, you can't really move past certain things, right? There are things that are going to be a hang up no matter what. So I think that was interesting. But as she steps out of the phone booth and a car comes crashing out of the sky, it's basically Dr. Manhattan's response to the joke that she was telling him, right? So even though she said, like, I might just be speaking into the void here, I don't know if you're even getting this, that's kind of the acknowledgement of, like, I am getting this shit and I see you and here's my response to that. So I thought that was a good payoff to those scenes because I was wondering, like, what are we doing? What are we doing here?
What are we
And then to
doing?
have that car come crashing and us to instinctively think, okay, that's Dr. Manhattan's response. He must be out there somewhere, somehow. And because time and space work differently for him, that doesn't close off any other opportunities that we may see in the future, but it lets us know that Laurie has not been sending these messages in vain, even if she doesn't normally receive a response.
All right, guys, so that'll do it for this discussion of the HBO miniseries Watchmen, episode 3, entitled "She Was Killed by Space Junk." If you've seen this episode, in the comments below, tell us what you liked about it. Tell us what you didn't like about it. But Matt, if the good folks at home want to chat with you about anything, whether it's Watchmen or anything at all, what would be the good place for them to find you at?
On Twitter at Matt Crandall.
All right, guys, and if you want to chat with me about anything at all, the best place to find me is also on Twitter. I'm at CrickFanatic88. But until next time, as I say often, I'll see you when I see you.
So much happened here, and so much is about to.